I want to get to Russia, and now I want to compliment you on your prescience. Um, the so NATO expansion. Bill Clinton decided to expand NATO. A number of people in the foreign policy establishment were opposed to this. You were opposed to it, and you did us the great service of actually interviewing for one of your columns one of the most eminent foreign policy figures of the 20th century in America, George Kennan, so-called architect of the policy of containment. He warned against NATO expansion. We expanded it. Now, from Russia's point of view, we talk about the things that may have led to the deterioration of relations with Russia. And of course, right now, most people aren't talking about American contributions to deterioration at all in America. But even the people who talk about it usually don't go back to Kosovo. But Kosovo drove them crazy for the following reason. Russia was against NATO expansion. We started expanding NATO. And what's the first thing we do? Okay. We intervene in a country that had been not just part of the Soviet bloc, but Serbia was a Slavic country, Orthodox Christian country, like Russia, long-standing kind of affinity. And so from Russia's point of view, and that intervention did not have the sanction of the UN Security Council as the Bosnia intervention had, which I supported. And if you get Putin alone now and say, start listing your grievances, he would probably start with Kosovo. I think maybe he became prime minister during that or something. I don't know, but this looms very large in the Russian consciousness, as does our subsequent recognition of the independence of Kosovo after we helped them carve out their autonomy.
Yeah, I was just beginning as a columnist then, so I don't remember exactly what position I had. Frankly, I'd have to go reread it, but I was always wary of that because my view on Russia and NATO expansion was very simple. I'm not a Russia expert at all, but I am an expert in this. We dreamed all our lives of a democratic revolution in Russia, and then it happened. And it seemed to me our first obligation and interest was to try to consolidate it and to try to integrate Russia into the West, including into NATO, as far as I was concerned. Whether that was possible, I don't know. But the fact that we prioritized bringing Bulgaria into NATO over consolidating democracy in Russia, and again, I wasn't an expert at all, it just seemed on the basic math of it, just kind of stupid. And so that's what brought me to call George Kennan. And he gave me a remarkable interview that almost laid out point by point what happened, which is that we will expand NATO. Russia will be too weak to resist. One day it will get stronger. It will resist. And then all the NATO expanders will say, I told you so.
That's right.
And so, which is basically what happened. Now, that for me, as you know, because we've talked about this, the Ukraine war it forked off into a separate issue. But the broader point, I think, still needs to be reminded of people. And Bob, we were a small group, myself, Michael Mandelbaum, but also Bill Perry, who was then Bill Clinton's defense secretary, Sam Nunn, and Dick Lugar. And of course, Lugar and Nunn were working together with Russia a lot then to ensure the security and safety of their nuclear program and nuclear scientists. So I still consider it a huge mistake. On this trip, I don't remember where it was, but I ran into a U.S. diplomat who introduced himself to me, and he said, you remember, but we met, like, blah, blah, blah. And at the time, I was working the Russia question, and you were opposed to NATO expansion, and you were wrong. I mean, so my position stuck in the craw of a lot of people back then because I was using the platform of the New York Times to really drive this point home. And to me, nothing good came of it. But again, and we'll talk about this more. To me, that isn't the entire cause of this Ukraine war at all. Although in the first column I wrote about Ukraine, I did say, hey, I'm on the side of the Ukrainians, but NATO is not innocent here. And there we are.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say it's the entire cause. There were a lot of contributing factors. and it gets so complicated by the end that it's hard to disentangle them.
Right.
I mean, for example, an example of their interconnection is, in 2014, there was this, I would say violent overthrow of a democratically elected president. The U.S. was in a certain sense, people argue about how supportive it was. It certainly kind of celebrated it and had supported the demonstrations, the protests that ultimately led to it. And and then Putin responded to that by seizing Crimea. I was just listening to this biography of Putin, and there's this quote from him, like back in 2000, I think it's as far back as 2008, after we had said we did want Ukraine to be part of NATO eventually, which I think you'll probably agree was, I don't know, I certainly don't think was the finest hour of the Bush administration.
Oh, there's a bridge too far.
But Putin saying, I think back in 2008, imagine NATO in control of Sebastopol. That's the naval base in Crimea, the Russian Black Fleet headquarters in Crimea. So although the 2014 revolution was not, it was at least as much about the EU as about NATO. In Putin's mind, NATO was a factor.
Thanks for watching Nonzero Clips. To hear more of this conversation and others like it, subscribe to the Nonzero YouTube channel or the Nonzero podcast feed. And to gain access to exclusive podcast content, subscribe to Robert Wright's Nonzero newsletter on Substack.